Welcome back, everyone, to the Mobilise Podcast. Thanks to everyone who's tuning in. My name's Hamish White. I'm CEO and founder of Mobilise. And with me today, we have a very, very important guest. His name's Ian Ginn from IFG Consulting Europe, and is somewhat of a master in terms of enterprise software sales, telecom software sales, but then also a bit of a guru in terms of telecoms knowledge and understanding experience as well. So welcome to the show, Ian.
Well, thank you for having me. And wow, I haven't had an introduction like that for quite some time. But any day, that sounds good to me. But as you say, I have been in the telco market a long time. I think it's like 25 years plus, but who's counting? And, what I'm doing, and that comes back to my interest in the wider telecom market, is to work with operators to find and accelerate their digital transition, and also to drive their revenues and reduce costs by working with key vendors in the telecom space who can provide and add value, as you mentioned, in the telecom enterprise and mobile space. So given that I'm a very broad remit, it's important for me to keep an eye on what's happening, particularly, and that brings me into the MVNO space, the whole concept of innovation, which we do hope that MVNOs are more innovative than your traditional telcos because they're more nimble and the rest of it. The other thing I'm proud of, actually, is that I'm a judge for the GSMA for their Gloma Awards. And then, like yourself, I've gone down the podcasting route, and my little pet project at the moment is Digitel Talk. And we also talk about telco topics, innovation, leadership, and also things around trying to make the world better using telecommunications as a topic. So hopefully one day I'll have you on our podcast as well.
Well, again, I have to apologise before the show that I couldn't make the last one that you had very graciously invited me to after the MVNO event in Vienna, but I came down with a bug, so I couldn't make it. But definitely, I'm on the agenda, and I've tuned into a few of them. They're really, really insightful, and I always, a bit of a tangent, but I always feel like the telco industry has traditionally been a little bit underserved in terms of the podcast landscape. There hasn't been a wide array of telecoms podcasts. There's like a few really good ones, like telecoms.com, for example, I find quite informative. But the more we have out there, the better. I think it's, spread the love, spread the knowledge of telecoms. And I think that only helps the industry in general. But I'm keen just to ask a few more questions about your background, and particularly kind of the operators that you support. But to set the scene for today, and you've touched on it a little bit there already in terms of MVNOs and them being more innovative, but we're looking at the future of MVNOs and key trends and how to stay ahead. And we know that the telecoms industry is evolving rapidly. I think it depends who you talk to. Some corners of the telecoms industry would say it's maybe not moving that quickly. Others would say it's moving really quickly. But certainly from my perspective and Mobilise's perspective, we see some kind of acceleration and innovation, particularly around eSIM, that I haven't seen probably since the iPhone. So it's really exciting times. But I just wanted to quickly touch back on the types of customers that you help traditionally, and maybe around the innovation side of things. So is there two parts to kind of what you help your customers within, in terms of, one, you can help them with a digital transformation strategy, I think that's what you mentioned there, but then also on the sales side too. So it's kind of a combination of both. And which types of customers would you be dealing with? Is it the MNO groups? Is it MVNOs? Is it software vendors? How does it normally play out?
Let me try and unpack that into various parts. Let me start off with the MVNO angle. I used to work for a company, or actually one of my customers, a company called Esco in Belgium, who actually were a sort of cloud-based PBX provider selling into the MVNO space. So I was working for them, trying to help them sell their technology, which we did into the MVNO market. Which also gives you a hint as to, actually, that's my sort of source of income, is actually working as a hired hand, helping companies with their go-to-market, their business development sales activity in a broader way, normally working directly with the sort of CEO level, because they're often companies with limited, let's say, sales capability at this stage when I'm engaging with them. But the reason why I sort of, when I introduced myself, I mentioned the operators is fundamentally, yes, they're the people, let's say, are paying for my services, but ultimately all of these companies I'm working for, and I'll explain more in a minute, are trying to, as I say, trying to make the operators more agile, fit for purpose, help them grow revenue, either top line grow revenue or reduce costs. And if I stick with that for a moment, I think there's realization, and that's an interesting point, I think, having me as a guest, because in that sense, we both work in the MVNO market, but we all, well, let's say the telco MVNO market. Lots of the work I'm doing is more in the plumbing side of things. So what I mean by that is the network side. And therefore, I have a visibility, and I also try and share that back to the MVNO market as to what are the changes happening on the MNO side, which will impact the capabilities MVNOs could have. To your point of things are changing or not. I've also worked with Reach Mobile. You might remember them. They are an MVNO player from America. So I helped them, work for them for a number of months to help them in the European market. They were trying to put the foot in the market and see how it goes. And then there are other sort of players. And by the way, we also worked together. If you remember as well.
Of course, I remember. It was the golden years of Mobilise sales activities having Ian in the fold. Yeah, I do remember. That is going back now, though, isn't it? That must have been 7 years ago, more than that, maybe even.
Yeah. So I like to, as I say, it's really a question of staying in the MVNO market. And as you say, I mean, something I enjoyed working with you on was, you really are one of the people that really can unpack sort of a marketing plan and go to market. And if you remember, one of the propositions at the time we were selling was a global Wi-Fi capability, connectivity. So the reason why it's also worth mentioning is that often people think connectivity is just eSIM or mobile connectivity. But as we know, I think 80% of traffic is actually done via Wi-Fi. So one shouldn't ignore it from out of the scope of things. So the companies I represent, as I say, as it currently stands, is mainly on the networking side. So companies involved with orchestration, network orchestration it's called, which is taking the BSS instruction from the customer and translating it into something the network can deliver in an automated fashion. It's a very clean technology, and it's a bit different to workflow. I'm working with a company involved with core security, 5G security. Germany, for example, has legislated that from 2026, the mobile networks have to be certified. The cores have to be certified by the government. Time's ticking. That's a whole Pandora's box. I'm also working with a company that's doing RAN optimization. So that means, don't know if people know that the RAN has to be optimized. One of the ways Bistro describing it is like a lawn. You actually have to have a lawnmower. The RAN, imagine your habitation or your RAN, the way the radio access network, by the way, sorry for using an acronym, but maybe there should be a pound for every acronym we use. By the way, we should have that on that and collect for charity, something like that. The RAN side is that your foliage, your trees look quite different, don't they, in the summer and the winter, and that affects the way the RAN has to be tilted, etc. So operators do need to look at their RAN and optimize it. And by the way, I think it's about 80% of an operator's costs are in the RAN area. So it's also not negligent area to work, which of course, the RAN area is just something that the MVNO guys just plug into and assume it works. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as that. But so those main areas I'm working with right now.
Very interesting. Got a few statistics here and maybe some talking points around key pressures. Let's set the scene for today's session. So really what we're talking about is unpacking where MVNOs are heading and how MVNO and maybe operators in general can stay competitive in what's really a fast-changing kind of tech-heavy landscape. Maybe just to talk a little bit about the context of where the MVNO market is globally today. There's different reports out there, but we'd say that there's somewhere around about 1,300 MVNOs globally. It's a really well-established business model. Some markets where it's really mature, like Western Europe or the US, some might argue that it's a bit stale, but in other markets, it's really growing quickly. Brazil, for example, Latin America in general, Mexico. and Africa as well. Nigeria is opening up to MVNOs. So the traditional model, as I might class it, is mature but still experiencing significant growth in new markets that are opening up to MVNOs. But then more broadly, I think there's a bit of a renaissance happening in the MVNO industry in general, and partly driven by eSIM. I think eSIM is, kind of really turned the business model of telco upside down. You can genuinely launch a digital first proposition. Previously, we had digital MVNOs, but always tied to a physical SIM card that had to be delivered in some way. But now with a travel eSIM provider, for example, you could have, 10 different providers on your eSIM capable device at any one time. So it's really opening up the market. And a nice statistic that Ian was kind enough to share recently is that the MVNO industry is growing twice as fast as the MNO industry. So there's incredible growth there and a lot of opportunity. But just to talk about some of the challenges, there is still, significant challenge in the telco space in general, particularly for MVNOs, is, margin shrinkage due to commoditization in general. That's a theme that we're seeing everywhere, particularly in national MVNO services. And whether you're kind of a digital first operator or whether you're heavily reliant on your MNO partner, tech debt from legacy systems is always a problem. Even the most agile MVNOs who start out that way can often over 10, 15, 20 years of adding bit by bit of technology to their stack can become quite slow and slow moving in the way that they implement change. So, but it's interesting. There's a lot of new business models out there now driven around eSIM, embedded connectivity, eSIM, travel eSIM services, which are growing incredibly fast. So let me pause there and maybe hand over to you, Ian, and generally, how do you see the MVNO business model today? How do you see the industry? What kind of challenges do you see specifically MVNOs are facing? And maybe what are some of the interesting trends that you're seeing in the MVNO industry that are help driving some of the growth we talked about?
Interesting. I think that we should unpack MVNO as well briefly. It's just, again, one of those wonderful acronyms that we've invented. And it basically means that the people don't own the RAN, but everything behind that, it can be various flavors of MVNO. I think we have various terms for them, full MVNOs or thin MVNOs. And I think you need to make that distinction. One of the trends which is clear is that MNOs, who often are seen, actually get very low scores from consumer. I've realized that actually it's cheaper and easier to create a new brand, sub-brand, and maybe make it more funky and easier to get to. So I think that's a trend we're seeing. Sub-brands are coming out by the MNOs. And in a way, it's also a way of avoiding cannibalizing that traditional market, and maybe in that sense go fully digital, because they can do that on spin that up, let's say, a lot more easily. So I think sub brands is an important trend that we're seeing in certain markets, and I think we see it that there are MVNOs who get a lot higher scores than the MNOs, right, in most markets. Yeah. And the other thing, which coming back to the eSIM as a whole, is that, the eSIM is the SIM, just to be clear to the listeners, which just that it's a digital SIM really fundamentally, which you can download in a digital way without having to go into a shop. It's not shipped to you. So there are also environmental pluses, and you can just streamline the whole onboarding process. And again, if we're looking at more mature markets, our lives are complicated enough. If someone can make it easier to get me connected, I'll go that route. So in my situation, I've got an iPhone 16. Mm-hmm. I have no physical SIM. I've got two eSIMs running in parallel, the German SIM and the UK SIM, for example. And my UK provider is an MVNO. And they provide an eSIM on the EE network. But coming back to your point about the market, I'd like to add in some sort of other bits. I think it's important that from an MVNO perspective, what MVNOs there for, right? At the end of the day, it tends to be that they were first of all created by the MNOs to fill their networks and create additional top-line revenue, which previously they wouldn't have got. But in more recent times, we've also seen that it's become a tool by governments as a remedy to actually bolster the market, because it's competition that we need to see. And in fact, I wanted to point out there's sort of a few cases where, for example, one is Malaysia. Malaysia has created a national network, backbone network, 5G, on which everyone sits. Mexico has created a national MVNE. So these are sort of approaches where people realize, look, connectivity has to be ubiquitous, and actually where you want to differentiate is on the service level, maybe the connectivity level. And I think those are sort of important trends. And I was at an event last week or the week before, Angacom it's called, and Michael Martin, the CEO of 1&1 SE, which is the brand there, the fourth operator, he was saying that they up to now have had a MVNO on the O2 network in Germany. They've got 12 million subscribers, so sizable. They've migrated 9 million across to the Rakuten Symphony network, and they're migrating at 200,000 a month now. So that I think by September, October, they should be finished if you work it out. And what they're able to do there, and I think this is another play on the SIM, is that within the SIM, you can also have more than one IMSI range. So you can have your own ISDN. So you can really, so that's what they did there, is they provisioned or gave customers a SIM with the O2 profile, and now basically overnight to switch them to the Rakuten or their own profile. So there are some clever capabilities that you enable through the eSIM as well. I think the other thing I would say, you were talking about mature markets, is that there are a number of, as the market matures, and I think this is something I'd point out to people, is where there are mature markets, I'm not sure you're best served to be directly connected to the MNO, because the MNO will also most likely have, you're competing with their consumer brand in a way, for development time. I'm not talking about necessarily directly in the market, but if you want changes on the network, that tends to be a limited capability. So actually, and I advise any MNOs listening to this, is they really should follow an MVNE type of strategy to offload it. So an MVNE can actually deal with the life cycle of the MVNOs in a much more appropriate way. That's what I'd like to see, and hopefully these MVNE providers have also these enablers have got MVNE capabilities. So I think that's an important point when sort of pointing out to the potential people who want to enter this market. And the other thing is, I'd say to your comment about travel, my comment to that is déjà vu. And what I want to say by that is, guess what? Was it not 15 years ago? Travel, normal SIMs was the thing, right? And talking to A1 Austria, for example, and I think you'll see it now, is that the MNOs have gone, oh, this is a nice market. As you know, that's what they often the MNOs do. If there's a successful MVNO business, they go, I'll have a bit of that, thank you very much. Yeah. So I think in short shrift, we're going to see the big MNOs, let's say, certainly enter that market and maybe gobble that up. So I don't personally think the travel eSIM, even though I agree with you, it's successful right now, unless you have some additional added value, I'm not sure the margins there for the long term. I think MNOs themselves are going to want to have a piece of that cake.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You've mentioned a whole bunch of really interesting things there, but start on that piece there about the travel eSIM business model and market in general, and said it perfectly well. Like we've seen with other kind of business models in telco space before, particularly the traditional MVNO model, is that once it gets to a certain size, the MNOs are like, oh, that looks nice. And so, strategies like digital sub-brands or acquiring MVNOs, like GiffGaff in the UK got acquired by its host partner O2 back in the day, now super successful MVNO in the UK. So yeah, I see that there is going to be some eating of lunches in that space for sure. And I think the challenge really is, we see it often just day to day, there is a bit of a race to the bottom going on in terms of pricing. There's still good margins there, but the wholesale roaming pricing market the bottom has fallen out of it in the last 12 months, and all due to the fact that there is significant competition from these eSIM travel eSIM roaming providers. But there is most certainly a vibe, without naming names, but there is most certainly a vibe within the M&O community of this is getting a little bit too low, these prices. We need to figure out how to protect our, our national retail price points,
Right.
because there are instances where you could buy a travel SIM cheaper than a national operator SIM card for a country. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, Germany, you could buy a travel eSIM from one of the big players that was cheaper than actually buying from Vodafone or O2 or one of the other big carriers in Germany. And so like that's put the brakes on it. It's like they have to maintain some kind of baseline to ensure value without the market getting too eroded.
Yeah, I think a very important point though to mention about eSIMs is that most of them are data only.
Yeah.
And it's not a full subscription in the conventional sense. So clearly lots of countries have barriers where if you want a full SIM, you've got to be registered, etc. So there are limitations as to what you can do with it, but you're absolutely right that if you're only looking for data, obviously need to go for what you think is the best offer, I guess, at the time of selection. And do you have comments about then? When are people buying these eSIMs? Do you think is that the first time you think most people, average consumers, getting in contact with eSIMs is travel?
I think so. The awareness of eSIM in general has been really low over the last 2-3 years. Like GSMA released statistics, and you see kind of statistics like 10% awareness 2 years ago of like just what eSIM technology is, and then it's increased, and recent statistics would probably show it's closer to about 30%, but that's still very low, so only 30% based on these surveys of consumers have heard about eSIM. That's let alone those that have actually used eSIM or have eSIM capable devices. But I think, yes, the travel eSIM, there seems to be some kind of like a loose link that has been made in the telecoms industry that eSIM translates to travel. And that's where you use it, like even EE launched a program, it was probably about 6 months ago, 5 months ago, something like that, where they said, get your travel eSIM here. For me, being maybe a little bit deeper in the weeds, it mixed the messages. eSIM is a tool to facilitate provisioning and delivery of the SIM. It's got really nothing to do with travel per se. It can be used in multiple situations for provisioning, but I think awareness has grown around eSIM significantly because of the travel eSIM players, but I do think it's starting to become more mainstream. Like from anecdotal data on our side, from our partners and ourselves, there's some markets now in Western Europe that is north of kind of 35-40% of new SIM activations are done by eSIM. Whereas 12 months ago or 18 months ago, let's say, it would have been 5%. So the trajectory is really is fast, it's growing.
But the other driver, of course, around that is device capability, right? Fundamentally, unless the devices do it, and I guess I'm sure audience will, if they're following the news in telco, Apple are pushing more and more towards eSIM only, in fact, which again, to your point as to why the pickup's partially there is that, I guess, as Apple did disrupt the market, was it 10, 15, no, even longer now, isn't it 2004? When was the Apple? Was it
20 years ago? I think 20
years ago. When they basically came in, they disrupted it in the first place and created, let's say, a computer in your hand sort of approach came from them, really, and being able to use apps and app stores. So in a way, Apple is maybe leading again in that disruption, because it tends to be, even though I'm an Apple user myself, the high-end users and prepared to pay for Apple. It's a whole nother question whether you're an Apple or other person, but fundamentally they do. That's the one sort of device manufacturer that the operators do tend to bend for, bend for as well. So the other area I think worth mentioning on the eSIM side, which is, and some interesting numbers here, which if you remember us being both at MVNO World with Dario I mentioned from Omdia, is that the examples of these neobanks, right, who are basically app-first providers who are providing financial services, and then saying, well, maybe I want to get, more deeply ingrained or involved with my customers. One being Revolut, who I believe the statistics you shared was 600,000 eSIMs. It says SIMs here, but I think there's many eSIMs. I'm actually a Revolut user myself, but I haven't gone as far as their SIM. The other one which I saw, which is only eSIM, is in Brazil called Nubank.
Yep.
Newcell is their brand, and it's only for that. And in the case of Newcell, is that you basically get access to a special savings account if you buy their SIM. So of course they're able to use, let's say, leverage their existing services to actually get people to start using their SIMs as well. So I think that's another one. And the other one, if we're sticking with the banking world, which I don't think it'd be remiss not to mention, is our friends M-Pesa, which is mobile money related. But I think these things are quite strongly linked.
Totally. It's a really good point. And it, for me, ties a little bit into the bundling question you mentioned before. As a result of the margin pressure that these travel eSIM providers are going to experience, what can they do to add other value-added services or bundling strategies to strengthen their margins? And this is what I mentioned before about there being a bit of a renaissance in the MVNO space. Is there is this reverse trend happening where actually mobile is getting embedded into other products and services and digital ecosystems. So you mentioned the perfect example there of Revolut, which is, reversing the trend, which is previously you would have, a physical SIM card being put into, a banking proposition. But this is the other way around, where the eSIM is being embedded into financial services solution. Yeah, its business model there is really interesting. So I use Revolut, and I have the eSIM product, and I find it really interesting how they've positioned the pricing. It clearly looks like a loss leader, so they're not trying to make a whole lot of money out of it. I'm sure that they are, but they're not trying to make a whole lot of money out of it. But they're creating this ecosystem of products and services that individually those products and services might not make money, but you bundle them together, then you've got a very healthy margin to play with. And the eSIM that I have is from Revolut is I'm on the Ultra plan with Revolut, which, because I travel a lot, I get access to lounges. That's basically the reason why I've got it. And that's one of the perks they have. But I get a global eSIM SIM card with 3 gigabytes of data for free as a part of that package. And but there's that 10 other things that I've also got as a part of that Ultra plan in Revolut. So the model is creating that stickiness, and stickiness is everything. Bundling and stickiness is everything, it seems, in today's consumer world. And we talk a little bit about digital super apps. I should say digital super apps is a similar strategy where you're bundling together. This is really interesting. It's kind of like this reverse trend of banks and travel companies and hotels. There's a whole remit of these adjacent industries bringing eSIM and mobile into their product portfolios to create that stickiness. And that's where I think there is a bit more of a renaissance happening. And MVNO is probably not the way to describe what's happening there, but there's a bit of a renaissance in terms of the opportunity for telcos and MVNOs and the industry as a whole, I think.
Yeah, I think the thing, the sort of analogy I have in my mind is, you remember credit cards, right? At the end of the day, you're sort of the bank's coming with you a particular version, flavor of credit card, and that's sort of the way that we, have in our wallets number of credit cards. I sort of feel that's what's going to happen a bit around the eSIM as well. So there'll be a number of providers, but we'll treat it pretty much in a similar vein. I think it's worth maybe exploring some of the other sort of areas that MVNOs still, flourish as well. I mean, there are some there which I know you'd asked me to sort of to come up with some there. So I thought of we have the ethnic group still. I'm thinking of the people like in Virgin Mobile in the Middle East, for example. I think they have quite a lot of workers coming in from ethnically from other parts of the Middle East or even further away. So they have their own sort of brands. They're quite successful, I think, with millions of subscribers. You also then have the places even like China, the UK, they're with the M-Link. So that's sort of supporting ethnic groups or traveling groups.
There is a bunch of models out there that that's I think the thing that has proven to be successful for MVNOs in the past, and that's probably one of the takeaways for today. And maybe my understanding of the MVNO model today is like, be niche, be focused, be nimble, add additional value into the proposition. Those are the ones, those are the MVNOs that have traditionally been quite successful, and I think it stands true. Like, you've got, for example, Tesco Mobile. That's like one of the poster childs for the MVNO industry. They leveraged their retail estate. They had a fantastic retail estate, and they leveraged the club cards, Tesco Club card to kind of gain more points. And then you've got other MVNOs like Virgin Mobile in the UK, which really differentiated itself on better customer service, very much like you said. Today, they're probably a bit different than that in terms of the USP, but that's the way that they carved their niche out in the market, is better customer service than the MNOs. Even though they were serving off T-Mobile at the start, they had better NPS scores than T-Mobile, even though they were serving off the same network.
That's amazing. That one, Harry, is incredible.
It still happens.
But it means, it brings me to the point that, we talk about these operators as if they mean something, or we even talk about 4 or 5G if it means something. And for most people, it just needs to work. And so people don't even call it a mobile operator. They say that damn Wi-Fi box or whatever it is, who's my Wi-Fi provider, which is a whole nother sort of kettle of fish in that sense. But yeah, it's quite interesting how we perceive it in the industry, but the people in the outside world, I think it just needs to work, right, fundamentally, and get them the connectivity they want. But I think another area we wanted to explore was AI and how it's affecting industry. Have you got any examples there which you'd like to talk about? I think just before, where AI is just, again, just almost like MVNO, it's such a big term, but underneath, when you unpack it, you can break it down to other areas. But there's obviously dealing with the customer, efficiencies in operations, logistics, all sorts of areas that are touch points where AI is used. And one of the starting ones, I think, which is revealed by, is it Vikings in Poland? They're called, what are they called? Telco Vikings? They're just Vikings. I can't.
Mobile Vikings.
Mobile Viking, Mike, in Poland. They have the analyst on stage, and he said, the days of browser searching are limited, because he said, what does an AI, if someone's looking for best package in Poland for mobile connectivity, the AI is using a very different data source than the normal conventional search engines. So they're trying to actually train or influence the actual AIs, thinking that's a better strategy than actually trying to influence searchers. So that's another, if people haven't thought about it, that's the life of search engines, which is, guess what, why our friends Google are applying a whole lot of money into AI and trying to avoid you moving there. But it's a segue. But what's your take in AI and how it affects the?
Yeah, you make a good point there about how it's changing search and how MVNO brands can be discovered, and we see it with Mobilise ourselves. Like, we've now been prioritizing, making ourselves visible to AI like ChatGPT and Claude and those types of AI engines, and it's different. It's very, very, very different landscape in terms of getting in front of your customers nowadays. So that's something definitely to pay attention to for MVNOs. But I think there's I would say that there's some low-hanging fruit in the AI space with telcos, like the support agent, being able to chat with an AI agent, to learn about products, but then also purchase and provision. That's starting to gain a lot of traction in the industry, and there's plenty of players out there that is doing that. And I think there's efficiencies for costs and support. AI-driven network optimization, preventative maintenance. I think there's a whole bunch of benefits that AI can bring to bear. I think, as the telco industry has been somewhat guilty of in the past, it's the pace at which these types of new technologies and AI technologies will get adopted that's probably the biggest problem. Telcos just move at glacial speed, for very good reasons often as well. So there's those things, but in my view, I think there's some really, really interesting disruption that's potentially on the horizon using AI, and it's one of the problem statement is that the telcos have struggled to innovate because of tech debt and legacy tech debt. So, systems that are built on systems that are patched to spaghetti, and then you find it impossible to make change. And I think where AI potentially could change the dynamic here is it is becoming obvious that it is so much more efficient to code with AI than it's ever been to code manually in the past. And I feel like there is an opportunity for MVNOs or telcos in general to harness AI coding efficiencies to be able to deliver innovations on the telco network stack more efficiently than has ever been possible before. And so I think when you break that down into what does it mean, it means that telcos can innovate a lot faster than they've ever been able to before. They should be able to. And I think for me, that's the really interesting disruptive thing that AI could bring.
And do you think the eSIM AI combination is something particularly that MVNOs can leverage? I'm thinking of our friends, I think we more your traditional neck of the woods of AI source who are, I think, do predictive work, but certainly having you also have a lot more granular data as to what the consumer is doing. So is that an area you think which is somewhere a quick win for MVNOs potentially?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like eSIM's disruptive, AI is still potentially is still the disruptions to come in the telco industry, I think. And you combine them together, I think you've got really two technologies that we haven't seen this kind of disruption in the telco space with eSIM or AI in a long, long time. And I think it just sets anyone who gets behind it, who harnesses it, and executes like AI strategy well, is bound to succeed and create new opportunities that we haven't had before.
Yeah, there was a company at the MVNO World who presented, and their name is Bromoville, who believe that they've achieved 100% growth using AI in various parts of the business. So they were talking about marketing itself, product and user experience, business and financial management, customer support and services, operations, logistics, and leadership and culture. So there you go. So I think those are different areas that they sort of highlighted as there. I don't know to what extent they're using what area, but it's certainly areas that can be used, which are worth referencing, I think.
Totally, yeah. And there's I think another area as well, which is data analytics, and we we use chat internally in the business. We use ChatGPT and others, Copilot, Claude, like lots of different ones. But we were analyzing data the other day, just very rudimentarily, basically taking data and using an agent to process it. But just the speed at which we were able to get findings was just monumental in comparison to the old days. Like the old days, we have a reporting tool which is based on Tableau. You'd have this whole ETL process. You have to extract, you have to transfer, you have to upload it, then you've got a graphical interface to have to interact, and then you got to extract the data, create the reports, and but like literally it was here's a dump of data. Tell me this, tell me that. Tell me what the ARPU was. Tell me which customers are close to churning, which aren't using their plans, and literally within minutes you're getting the result that might take a few weeks or months worth of work to build out. So yeah, it's data analytics, and things like churn prediction, for example. Like churn prediction's been around as a kind of silver bullet for a long time, but it hasn't really, in my opinion, of the current tools that are available in the telco space for churn prediction. It's hard to deliver on that, I think, effectively and at scale. But with AI tools, it just feels like it's much more realistic. But it's interesting, and I'd ask us the similar question in the kind of the conversations that you're having in your customers. Do you see them, kind of taking putting AI strategy at the top of their agendas, or are some like, is it more let's kind of wait and see, or how do you see your customers prioritizing AI in their businesses?
Well, I think you mentioned the way you just described it. I guess when you just described your own use of it, you've got sort of data sets which you're in control of and you're as input. Actually, one of the companies which I was mentioning, which I do work for, who's involved with this orchestration automation. Funny enough, that is the fundamental. So I'll give you an example of where sort of rubber hits the road, and that if you give, let's say, trying to configure a service in the network, right? There's a practical example. If you give 10 engineers manually the task to do it, they'll all do it. But I bet you get 10 different configurations. And what I mean by that is it's not necessarily the plumbing itself, but things like descriptives, metadata, right? How they actually describe the service. Each one will do it different. Like same as you most likely from a CRM perspective, right? How can you write a company's name 10 times? It exists, right? So do you put in with the limited or not? It's the same thing. So the AI is only as good as the data set underneath it. So even though I see it not time and again at the shows, the executives of the top operators, and hopefully they'll still talk to me after this when I finish this little rant, talking about, oh yes, we are on top of it, we're working with it. Well, as you mentioned yourself, spaghetti and legacy and sort of that technical debt. Often the networks just really are, historically just never been configured the way they need to be for AI to be leveraged. So, and that's an area I'm working on the network side of things. But I think on the personal level, I'm pretty much, which of course is the other aspect of why AI has become so transformative, is because it's sort of democratized the way we're able to access and use data, as you say, without necessarily using a data analyst ourselves, right? We can turn something around within minutes. I think everyone is using it to some degree, some more or less sophisticated ways. The way I personally like to use it is almost like something to a sparring partner. So like to ask it something, obviously some data points, as you say, is one thing, but also, try and ask it to put itself can be a consultant for me. So when I type in, so be a consultant for me and tell me what you think of X, Y, or Z. And one of the examples I can give you, a true one, is I said to the AI, look, I need you to be a sales consultant and give me advice on this difficult customer. What do you think he cares about? And I fell off my perch. I thought it was so good what it came back with. It came back with some points, some pressure points that even didn't know the customer was. I didn't obviously even mention the customer by name. I described the customer, what sort of customer it was. That was eye-opening, if you like, from that perspective. So yeah, I think, as you say, I think as someone was saying, I don't think it's going to be AI. This is what I heard this on the podcast the other day. It's not AI that's going to outpace you. It's the other person that knows how to use AI that's going to outpace you. So that's the learner I think we need to take from it. And yeah, it's the good news is, we had the Industrial Revolution. This is now the data revolution, if you like. That's what AI is actually enabling, is how we master and work with data. So to my comment to anyone doing AI, treat it with caution and only use it as a reference point, but don't believe it as the source of truth.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's such an interesting time at the moment, and the way that AI is trying to transforming the way that we do things, and the speed at which it's happening as well. And I think you made a good correlation there, the Industrial Revolution, and now we've got the data revolution being led by AI. I feel like the pace which AI is evolving is just like nothing we've ever seen before. And like I signed up for ChatGPT 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, or whenever it was when it first came out, and that model versus what we've got available to us now is just night and day. And it's quite incredible how quickly it's evolving. Yeah, I mean, I'm on the one hand concerned, and like you mentioned there about the competitive challenge with AI. And I was talking to someone the other day, it was actually a friend, we were out on Friday night, and he was like, oh, but you don't really have to worry about AI, do you? Like, that's not something that your business is going to have to struggle with. And I said, well, when we don't have direct threats, but there are industries that are a direct threat, I think, of substitution. But it's more about, the people next to us, our competitors, how quickly are they adopting it and how fast are they moving? That's the threat. And, it's hard enough to run a software business as it is, let alone have to worry about something like AI that is the most transformative thing that's come around in however many decades. And it's complicated, and how do you use it? It's an interesting space. But I wanted to ask you something, if I can just change tack a little bit. What do you think about, like if I pull out my crystal ball and I be a little bit like philosophical, I could see a place where, MNO brands become less relevant. Like we're seeing it today with travel eSIM, like, that's kind of substituting roaming plans from operators, and it's becoming more easy for users to avail of those. Obviously, quite a small use case, but if you stretch it ahead, you're now looking at banks like Revolut just taking the plumbing from the MNO and offering a mobile service directly. Pretty good offering. Where do you sit in this? Where do you sit in this kind of discussion around MNOs becoming bit pipes? I feel like it's been something that has been in the industry for a long time. Like the operators are more going to become like utilities and just providing the plumbing, and you're going to have this layer on top, such as MVNOs, that are really going to be the ones that own the customer relationships. Where do you sit on that as a threat to the MNO industry, but an opportunity for the MVNO industry, I guess?
Yeah, so that's another topic. The API-fication. Wow, is that a term? Creating APIs to access the services is the way industry itself is intentionally going. So there are big moves on the operator side. There's I think there's a company, name escapes at the moment. Ericsson's involved as well. That's done a spin-off, and there are 12 main operators.
Is it Aduna?
Now?
Aduna?
Sorry, Aduna. Yes, I think you're right. Yeah. So that's the project which they're trying to basically extract value out of the network. Let's put it that way, through APIs. And if you follow that through in a consequent manner, that's actually I think the historical problem is the MNOs are a vertical organization. They go all the way from the optical plumbing side and data centers all the way up to consumer and beyond. And actually, we need actual horizontal specialization and actually layering. So I think there is actually, coming back to my example I mentioned of Malaysia or even Mexico, that creating a layer of just basic connectivity on which other people can build is economically sensible, is environmentally sensible, and really I do foresee that whether it happened in my lifetime, I'm not sure, but actually you creating a ubiquitous network coverage, and I'll come back to that in a second if you don't mind, why it's so important, is the way to go. And again, the work that I'm doing on with the company that does RAN optimization, you see it as well, right? And we know it in the UK. I mean, I don't know, I think your home coverage is quite good right now, but you just have to walk down the street and it can often be bad. We just don't have that we don't have that coverage the way it should be. There are places in the world, I believe China is one of them, who are really trying to steal a march on us in that sense. And I find it disingenuous of certain podcasts and other reporters always focusing on the West as the leaders in telecoms. I don't see it that way anymore. Maybe a few years ago I did, but as you know, with my judging, I've also had the ability to see some of the amazing thing that China does. And I point to them in particular because there is a whole area which, when we talk about mobile, right, actually mobile coverage is important actually outside of the building. That's actually the space we're talking about when you're moving. And if you want to think about flying drones, you want to fly about robots outside of the building, that's a white space at the moment, right? But that is where you need connectivity, and you can't fly a drone thinking that halfway along it's going to lose signal, or not know it's going to lose signal or not. So there's a whole bunch of outside optimizations that can be done, and so I think the way forward is to actually, ideally, MNOs should think of treating their consumers, their consumer brands, and maybe even their business arms as type of MVNOs, decoupling them from the underlying plumbing. And that plumbing should be a wholesale offering to whoever needs it. And we actually see there's a parallel to this actually on the fiber side as well, by the way. So not just the mobile side. Similar situation, right? Everyone has to your home. You've got physical connectivity. Hopefully you only got one line into your home, but it is theoretically possible to get 2 lines or 3 lines into your home, depending on the competitive landscape. But, that's not efficient, is it? So the idea is, let someone put fiber into your home, for example, and then they wholesale it out to other people who then want to provide you as a retail product with added value services. I see fundamentally the RAN, similar constellation or architecture. The RAN is an asset which should be shared and made available. We also have neutral hosting, an area you maybe have come in across. I think that will become more and more standardized model. It's mainly been driven at the moment from a perspective of in building where, like a stadium, whatever, where you want to create coverage for the main operators, because otherwise there'll be a lot of upsets to customers, where you're basically sharing the as I say, the radio part. But that's a model that's going to have to become more pervasive, and really the competition should be more at an MVNO level, i.e. customer service. And other added value that people can build on top. So in a way, I think MVNOs, again, maybe are shining a light on MNOs as to what they should be trying to be.
Yeah. I would agree with that totally. And I think in addition, there is, like, I think 2 other main categories of problems for the MNOs in kind of evolving into where new consumers need them, new age consumers need them to be, which is much more customer focused and centric. And I think on the on the one side, like, there's a lot of tech debt, as we mentioned before, in some of these MNOs. It's super difficult, I think, to run those networks. So being also a network provider and innovating at the consumer level to kind of meet the needs of what consumers are looking for today, it's hard. It's really hard to do. But then I think what really makes it worse and compounds the problem is that there is most certainly a cultural kind of challenge within the telco industry, which is, you touched on it before, it's like it's very much network centric, propositioning and product development. And so it's like 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, best coverage, 99%. It's all very much driven by network, whereas the new consumer wants to hear about benefits to them. Like, what are you doing for me? How are you going to make my life better? And so when you see brands like Revolut, for example, that's probably a really good example, is that the user experience in that application is just it's awesome, and you can see just by the way that they have built the proposition, it really focuses in on customer pain points and solves those. And obviously traditionally from the banking industry, but I make a lot of correlations between the banking industry and telco today. Like, I feel like telco is about 10 years behind banking in terms of its digital transformation. But you can see that Revolut has solved a lot of those real customer pain points. They've really put the customer at the center of their proposition and built around the customer. Whereas I feel like telco culturally is still like, we're going to build this network and we'll sell it to the customer,
It's funny you mentioned that, because one of the things on the enterprise side of the telco, they have trying to sell 5G private networks, right? But let's face it, who of us would say, I'm looking for an agile partner who can help me build a private network? It's the first people on my thought to ring one of the large MNOs. I mean, it's almost impossible to get through the front door. As we know, you end up in a call center. So that's the reason why I think exactly, let's create because the network itself needs to be broad, has to be capable. That's a different proposition and a different ask to building the services on top and the propositions on top. And actually, the nimble MVNOs are exactly actually prime examples of the way it should be done. As I say, I think there's also almost like, well, there is a conflict of interest, you could argue, between MNOs actually having a retail branch and supporting MVNOs. Of course, the logic is, and that's the way the industry's been up to now, is you want to become an MVNO. Yes, you can go and talk to MNO, but make sure you're basically not, trying to compete in the heart of what they're trying to do, their consumer brand, because that's just not going to fly. But why not take that away and say, actually, here's a network, here's say to the plumbing, and let people build value on top. And I'm not saying that, just to be clear on this, that an MNO could not, for example, maybe have a private 5G practice, a vertical capability that they want to add, but it should have the same access to the network as anyone else. So it should be a clear, and I think it's very difficult. And I just think if you're talking about the AI, I think the AI is a bomb going off in telcos right now. If you could, in a positive way and negative way, but basically it's sort of shattering the worlds. Because if you're sitting there as the CEO of one of the big telcos, and we just had a discussion about our companies, which we both, I think, would agree are manageable in size. But you've got 60,000 head of people who all go, "Ooh, I want to use AI. How am I going to work that in my business?" They've got so much data coming in, they don't know what to do with it. It's quite a challenge and a headache. And then the funny thing is, the investors are coming along and saying, "Well, you're not very efficient with your AI, aren't you?"
Yeah.
Where's I'm expecting efficiencies here, but they've forgotten. If they started from scratch, different matter. But these are living organisms, as someone once called it, is changing a network in a telecom operator is like open heart surgery on a marathon runner as he's running. And it is like that. And one of the things is that it's continuous, right? Fundamentally, is you're not going to stop operations. You need to transition as you're going. Service has to stay at 5 nines, which is, by the way, higher than pretty much every other industry. And that's sort of the framework which has been set. And it's nigh on impossible. And the one constant in telcos is migration and transformation. So to my comment right at the beginning, I'm helping operators with migration and transformation. Is everyone is that's what you do, because that's the one constant that's there.
No, it's very true. And I think to add to your points there about the challenges for telcos is there's also revenue cannibalization as well when you talk about new initiatives and like opening up the network so that there is it's a network, and the plumbing is exposed to other MVNOs or brands that want to build on top. That's potentially a strategy that threatens existing revenue lines, and so there's this question around cannibalization, which I think also very rightly, as you said, talks to some of the main challenges that MVNOs have had over the years getting deals with MNO partners. Is like, are you cannibalizing me or are you complementing me? And yes, there's going to be always some overlap, but what's the percentage? And obviously where there's been regulation around it, it's been a little bit different. It's more forced when an MVNO has been used as a remedy in M&A, mergers and acquisitions, for example. It's challenging. I mean, I tend to give MNOs as a broad kind of cohort of the telco industry a hard time a lot, because it feels like there could be more that's done. It could be done in terms of innovation, but it's super hard, and there's a lot of challenges to overcome to be able to innovate and move quickly. Not least of which executives in most MNOs are pretty driven today by short-term incentives like quarterly results, share price, and that's hard to overcome at the exec level,
But one thing that's happened the last 4 years, which through COVID and beyond we've noticed, is how, as we become more digital animals ourselves, i.e. we live, breathe, function through digital, it's also moved from being a service to a critical service. And why do I mention that is that someone was actually saying, what's my priority, right? is it water? Is it food? Is it electricity? Is my mobile functioning? And they put mobile functioning was their number one priority. The others were behind it now, right? That's their number one. They can live hours without water. They can live days without food. But if their mobile's down for 2 hours, they're stuck, right? So I mention it because, again, not giving it away, but it was this very senior executive of one of the operators, and given the geopolitics of it, is that, look what happened to Spain, right, recently with the power cuts. So, and we also had the Heathrow incident, which still is very murky as to why a substation should suddenly fail. I wonder why. Fundamentally, yeah, I think coming back to this whole redundancy side, so the aspect, if you go to Crystal Networks, and comes back to my comment about actually making sure that utility connectivity service is available in the country, you maybe need 2 parallel networks as redundancy able to run, right? So that you have that connectivity. I've heard Dean Bubley, you maybe know, one of the analysts, I think he was at an event recently and said, well, given that some of the spectrum's always being made available for the forces, maybe given that they need coverage if something goes wrong, they actually set up a service and then share it back to the community. So I do think there's, you asking about the future of telcos, I think the more and more we move along, people are going to realize that basic line connectivity is utility, and operators should not be ashamed it's called that, but it's also a must-have critical function. So it's not just utility, it really is critical to our lives. That should not be up for discussion in the sense of compromising on that. And so I think those countries which have taken the view of, I'm going to create a baseline connectivity across my country, is the way to go, and then allow people to build services on top. And therefore MVNOs should be in a very strong position. In fact, pretty much every service provider will become some sort of MVNO. That would be my future conclusion as to where I radically would like the industry to go.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, and it's critical infrastructure. There's no doubt about it. Like when networks go down, fiber networks go down, sea cables go down, whole countries are shut down for sea cables, for example. But yeah, it's interesting, and it's funny because, like I said before, I sometimes give MNOs a hard time for not innovating quicker, but geez, we couldn't live without them, and it's such critical infrastructure. But maybe the balance is, a shift in the business model, which is, open access with service layer on top that's managed by multiple different parties. Super interesting. So maybe what we could do is do a little bit of a final takeaway. If you were to advise an MVNO customer on what are the key points that they should focus on to create a winning MVNO strategy, what would they be? I'll put you on the spot a little bit there.
It's sort of the basics of if you're, trying to set up an MVNO. So I think there are certain, if I start off with, there are certain things which every MVNO there's an envelope in which they have to deliver their business. So first thing is they need to be aware of the regulation situation. As you know, certain countries are for it, some are liberalized, some are it's managed, some it's not even possible. So first of all, that's the sort of thing they have to do. They should be aware of, again, depending on what they're trying to do, the handset strategy in the country. They should think about who could they even partner with. Traditionally, it tends to be the sort of third or fourth operator in a country, if there is such a thing, who's the more wholesale MVNO friendly, because they're trying to fill their networks as well. And of course, also like things like coverage, 4G, 5G, even 6G, I think, as well. And then the real thing is they need to think of their niche, their audience, and their differentiation, and make sure that has legs, meaning that it's not differentiation that can be, if the answer is an MNO can undercut me through price, but basically provide the same service, then they haven't got a business. So don't even basically bother starting, unless you are, as I say, serving a particular community which otherwise could not be served. But also, if you want to become an MVNO, remember you are now selling connectivity. So this is the fundamental way of people, let's say, communicating. So you should also ask the question, why do I want to have ownership of that relationship at that point, at that level? Coming back to what you mentioned with Revolut. So I presume it's got to do with brand loyalty, but also that maybe there are data they're able to extract, and also making sure that the customers are able to access the other services they want by making sure they're online all the time, right? Because part of an app solution is that you need to make sure there's connectivity. So my advice would be beyond that, and I had made a few notes, is build a business plan, right? Know your customer and your tribe, whatever it is, and then really, if you're not someone who's worked in the industry a long time, I come back to that diagram I did in 2018 of the complexities, and that was just on a technical level about MVNOs. Talk to some experts. Two of them are on the call right now who can at least point in the right direction and maybe help you, and there are other people out there as well, because it's certainly, I think, a worthwhile place to be. It's an exciting area. It's growing, as we mentioned. There are still pockets of capability and opportunity there, but you need to do it with your eyes open and with a clear business plan, I think would be my takeaways.
Very good. Very sound advice indeed. Very sound advice. I'd add not to repeat, I think everything you mentioned there is absolutely spot on. I'd add also like find a USP and just hone in on it. Focus really, like laser focus on a particular USP, whether it be customer service, whether it be digital experience, and just do it really well. Be niche, be focused, and then I think when we talk about adding additional value to the business like case and the bottom line, it's bundling. There's a real shift and wave of innovation that's coming around now, which seems to be focusing around this super apps concept. And the telco industry has kind of done it in some ways, but not fully. Banking industry has done it a lot. And there's other companies as well, like Uber. So yeah, that'd be really laser focus on the proposition and your USP, and then find ways to add value through bundling.
But when you say bundling, the connectivity is basically part of the service that they're trying to provide. So it's it's a foundation block on which their other services depend. So yeah. So anyway, as you say, super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ian, thank you so much for joining today. It's been an incredibly insightful conversation. It's always a pleasure to connect with you. I always enjoy our conversations. There's always a good bit of banter in there as well. I only wish we could have done it over a beer, but next time, either over the next podcast or some event that we get to. We'll enjoy that. And I appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully people have found some nuggets or some interesting thoughts to be able to generate some thoughts from our discussion and where the industry will go. And as you mentioned, yes, we do need to have maybe a drink together at some point and celebrate the industry and what we're doing together. And let's see what tomorrow brings. So I wish you all the best and the Mobilise team, and continue striving ahead with your eSIM propositions as well, and hopefully making some successful entrepreneurs very happy.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the listeners for joining today as well. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about MVNOs and also Mobilise's Hero platform, you can also visit our website, www.mobiliseglobal.com, and you can listen to this podcast on Spotify, YouTube. Thanks very much.